Anyone may experience difficulty in adapting to a situation or when going through a bad time in their lives. But occasional discomfort such as this is quite different from mental illness. In this program, we'll be showing you a few such illnesses: severe anxiety, depression, and schizophrenia. Life is full of stressful events. The first years of school, the choice of a career, retirement. These events create a feeling of anxiety that is quite normal. The anxiety may even prove stimulating. Deadlines, exams, interviews, competition can prompt people to outdo themselves. But sometimes anxiety can reach such proportions that the person loses all control. The anxiety then becomes pathological. Fortunately, today there exists effective treatment for anxieties like these. We all experience, during difficult moments in our life, a psychic state characterized by a pervasive feeling of worry. That state, anxiety, could be compared to a noise that would get louder or softer depending on the problems we encountered. As a rule, the psychological background noise is tolerable, but sometimes it will intensify, going beyond our level of tolerance. When uncontrollable, anxiety becomes a source of suffering and considerably lessens our quality of life. Not too long ago, these feelings of anxiety, which include phobias, for example, were difficult to treat. But recently, scientists and physicians have made significant breakthroughs in understanding anxiety and how to treat it. Some people have been plagued from childhood by a persistent fear of animals, certain objects, or situations which, in themselves, represent little danger. These excessive fears, which translate into unbearable anxiety, can become so powerful that their victims will systematically avoid anything liable to cause them. Just imagining the object of their fear is enough to make these people panic. Such fears are called phobias. For a long time, victims of phobia were powerless to alleviate their fear. But today, most of them can free themselves of it definitively, thanks to a treatment called systematic desensitization. Systematic desensitization helps subjects control their reactions when in the presence of the object of their fear. People who are afraid of flying, for example, are first taught a relaxation technique. Then they're gradually introduced to the various stages of a plane trip. During these therapy sessions, they listen to an audio tape that helps them imagine that they are traveling by plane, or watch a film simulating a landing. During the sessions, a biofeedback device helps them control their degree of relaxation. It measures their skin's electric conductivity, a function related to nervous tension. After a few weeks' treatment, 80 to 90% of the subjects clear this stage successfully. They then feel able, often for the first time in their life, to actually take an airplane. Phobia victims experience anxiety in the presence of the object of their fear, or when they imagine it. But this is not the case for people suffering from panic disorders. Victims of this disease are in a perpetual state of vague anxiety, and periodically they feel overcome by traumatic panic attacks. The attacks are not related to any particular situation or object. They occur anywhere at any time and completely paralyze the victims who may think they are dying or going mad. Sufferers may also experience violent physical symptoms. Their heartbeat may accelerate to 150 to 200 beats a minute. They may feel they are suffocating and even see their spirit leave their body. These attacks suddenly stop after 10 or 15 minutes. Leaving the victim completely exhausted and in constant fear of a relapse. Scientists, long baffled by panic disorders, now have a hypothesis for its origin. They believe that the disease is hereditary and stems from the brain. People with a close relative who suffers from panic attacks are 10 times more at risk of becoming victims of the disease. This prompts scientists to believe that a gene, one of the particles that controls heredity, may make people panic-prone. The mysterious gene would induce changes in the structure and processes of the brain. Using a magnetic resonance scanner, an imaging device capable of probing the inner anatomy of the brain, researchers have discovered lesions 5 to 10 millimeters in diameter in a number of panic disorder patients. These abnormalities are located in the white substance which constitutes the inner brain. Scientists do not know whether these strange lesions are the cause or the consequence of the disorder. One thing is for sure, they are definitely connected to it. These findings have enabled scientists to develop effective treatment for panic disorders. By taking anti-panic drugs regularly and following support therapy with a psychologist, panic disorder victims soon see their chances of a relapse reduced by 70%. Considering that in the past these people were condemned to a lifetime of horrifying fits, these advances are nothing short of spectacular.
We must be careful when we talk about mental illness. There's a major difference between the blues and depression. Real depression is a sadness that overcomes you all of a sudden, for no apparent reason, robbing you of all enjoyment and interest in everyday activities and fun. You feel empty, powerless, and incapable of functioning normally. In cases such as this, tranquilizers or vacations only make matters worse. Attempts to cheer you up are to no avail. Often, the only solution seems to be suicide. This condition can last for a very long time and requires medical attention.
Our vision of the world, relationships with others, and perception of ourselves are all tainted by a changing entity, our mood. When we are cheerful, we do not see things in the same light as when we are feeling low. Fortunately, our shifts of mood usually stay within certain limits, and tears will make way for a smile. But anyone can suddenly see life turn bleak, remaining so for long periods of time, without any apparent hope of improving. A profound mood disorder like this is one of the most common and difficult diseases of our times, depression. While they often do not show it, victims of a depression suffer terribly. They are constantly plagued by a feeling of melancholia and violent inner tension. Prone to feelings of guilt, pessimism, and failure, they direct their aggressivity toward themselves. They spend their time mulling over the past and view the future with apprehension. At the same time, their daily chores become an overwhelming burden to them, so much so that in the end, one by one, they stop doing them. They suffer a loss of appetite, libido, and sleep. Even some aspects of the thinking process, such as concentration and memory, are affected. Generally, these symptoms disappear on their own, but they can persist for months, even years. Sometimes they drive their victim to commit suicide. Fortunately, in recent years, physicians and researchers have learned a great deal more about this severe emotional disorder and have developed effective means of treating it. There are a number of factors that contribute to depression. One of the most important of these factors is the temporary change in the way the brain functions. Since the 50s, a number of cases of depression have been treated effectively with specific drugs called antidepressants. Antidepressants begin to have their therapeutic effect after 2 or 3 weeks of treatment, at which time the symptoms of depression quickly subside, often to the amazement of the patients. The latter regain their will to live, concentration, memory, resume their activities, and their sadness and feeling of despair vanish. Life becomes rosy again. How do these chemical substances work? According to researchers, antidepressants redress a biochemical imbalance of the brain. The imbalance would itself be in part responsible for the depression. The brain's activity is ruled by thousands of cells, neurons. Neurons resemble miniature trees. They have a cellular body with an elongated stem, which has a ramification of slender branches. The nervous information on which the brain depends travels along the neuron branches in the form of electric impulses. When the impulses reach the extremity of the neurons, they cause the secretion of chemical substances, neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters bridge the gap separating the neurons, which is referred to as synaptic space. When they make contact with the next neuron, the neurotransmitters trigger another electric current. Therefore, neurotransmitters regulate nervous transmission and the activity of each of the regions of the brain. By enabling neurons to communicate with each other, they constitute a veritable chemical language for the brain. Scientists have studied the effects of antidepressants on the brain. They have shown that antidepressants facilitate the action of a particular neurotransmitter, serotonin. According to researchers, depression could be caused, at least in part, by an alteration of the nervous transmission in certain areas of the brain. The limbic system, responsible for, among other emotions, aggressivity and memory, would be one of the areas affected. This might explain why these functions are deranged during periods of depression. Depression also affects the suprachiasmatic nucleus. This is the part of the brain that contains an internal clock, which regulates some of the organism's cyclic activities, such as the awake-sleep cycle and hormonal secretion. Alteration of these biological rhythms would constitute an important aspect of depression and explain several of its symptoms. Perhaps that is why changes in a person's regular routine, such as retirement, are frequently the cause of depression. But depression is obviously not only caused by a change in the nervous system. It results from a series of biological, psychological, and social circumstances. To effect a total cure, depression sufferers have to fight all the aspects of their affliction.
Mental illness is not only a personal problem, it's a social responsibility. Nowadays, attempts are being made to return to society people who used to be institutionalized. More than a third of our homeless people are former psychiatric patients. They find food in soup kitchens and end up in hospital emergency wards or police stations when they have their attacks. This is the result of a fairly recent practice. Hundreds of patients have been released. True, hospital beds are badly needed, but the main reason is to get the former patients back into the community. These patients are finding the return to real life very difficult. Of all mental illnesses, schizophrenia is the most feared. It is the model for the layman's concept of madness. It is certainly one of the worst forms of human suffering.
Every city has thousands of them. They suffer without being able to call out for help. They are the victims of the strangest and most serious of all mental illnesses, schizophrenia. Schizophrenia attacks the very foundations of the personality and mental processes. Its symptoms usually occur during adolescence or in early adulthood. After a generally uneventful childhood, the young person suddenly feels tormented, sick, anxious. He may have odd perceptions of himself or his surroundings. One fear haunts him, the fear of losing control of his body and mind. This is what is happening. The emotions of young schizophrenics are inappropriate to the situations they experience. Their speech is incomprehensible, and they have hallucinations. Most often, the hallucinations are auditory, voices commenting on their actions, insulting them, or telling them what to do. But they may also have visions of people threatening them, or be assailed by smells, or even physical sensations. For example, the feeling that their insides are being transformed. The symptoms occur periodically, handicapping the victim much as a heart attack might. Following an infarction, the heart is weaker, and patients must slow down and do less. Similarly, the personality and thought processes of schizophrenics decline after every episode. Schizophrenia totally disrupts the victim's behavior. Terrified by their own symptoms, schizophrenics break off all ties with the outside world and take asylum in their imaginary world. After the age of 40, the symptoms finally abate, but for the most part, former schizophrenics are lost to society. Despite much research undertaken to lessen the human and social burden of schizophrenia, the cause or causes of schizophrenia remain elusive. For years, doctors have been treating schizophrenia with a family of drugs, neuroleptics. Apart from their main effect, neuroleptics are liable to produce powerful side effects, such as involuntary muscular movements and blurred vision. Still, to some degree, they deliver patients from their most troublesome symptoms. The partial efficacy of neuroleptics would suggest that schizophrenia is to some extent related to a biochemical imbalance of the brain. Neuroleptics would have an effect on dopamine, a chemical transmitter substance. There may be an overabundance of dopamine in the brain of schizophrenics. Neuroleptics would partially redress that chemical imbalance. The schizophrenic brain may conceal other abnormalities. In schizophrenics, a region of the brain, the frontal lobes, appears less active than in normal people. The frontal lobes are responsible for the capacity to anticipate, that is, the ability to conceive of future events. They also regulate the establishment of harmonious social relationships, two skills schizophrenics seem to lack. Moreover, it would appear that the schizophrenic brain is not normally developed. This could be the cause of the speech and thought process problems schizophrenics experience. According to scientists, all these abnormalities may be genetically caused, maybe of a hereditary nature. But a genetic predisposition to schizophrenia would not be enough to trigger the disease. Other factors, such as emotional strains within the family, would be necessary. Schizophrenics are extremely sensitive to emotions that are either hostile or, conversely, too effusive. Contrary to widespread belief, highly emotional family environments would be more liable to trigger a schizophrenic's attacks than less demonstrative ones. In fact, schizophrenia appears to stem from a veritable potpourri of biological, psychological, and social factors. While the interaction of these factors remains little known, treatment has progressed. Specialized centers offer young schizophrenics opportunities for rehabilitation, where they can relearn skills to help them reintegrate into society, and where they are encouraged to continue taking medication. This kind of approach represents a major expense, but it does improve the quality of life of both the patients and their families.
It's only been for the past 30 years or so that scientists have been able to prove a connection between mental illness and certain abnormalities in brain function. May I live to see the day when we won't talk about mental illness anymore, but rather of metabolic illness that can be cured like any other.